So the first thing we're talking about is focus on improvement, not just revenue. When you're in that first 1 to 3 years of business, everyone is focusing on revenue. And I get it. I did the same thing in many startups, and I've had a few over the years, is that you really go head first into selling, right? And selling's critically important, don't get me wrong. Marketing and sales are probably the two most critical things for a business to be successful and gain traction. My point is though, is that there is another way through, right? If you think about in terms of growing a business, whether you have capital or you don't, you've got investors behind you, it's so much easier to do what I'm about to say. But if you don't, and you're a small business, and you could be a cafe or a restaurant or a business like that, that requires you to generate instant revenue and instant sales immediately. I'm talking and trying to resonate with those businesses especially. If you've got a whole bunch of money and you've got all these investors, it's easy to do what I'm about to say. Slow sales down. Right, so what I mean by that is focus on quality of the product, on how you deliver the product to your customer and to your client, and really hone the skills around that. Sometimes you have to slow down the P&L. Sometimes you have to slow down the balance sheet, and sometimes you have to slow down the revenue. And that seems counterintuitive, and maybe it is to some extent, but that said, you know, if you want to play the long game, good quality economics and to avoid burnout will require you to focus on value.
Elon could care less about your degree. What he's looking for is proof of exceptional performance. And so if you're an exceptional performer and you could prove it through something that you've done that's noteworthy, what's a problem that you've solved? What's an accomplishment that you've had? What's something that you've done that you're world class at? That's the type of thing that Elon will care more about. He's looking for problem solvers. He himself is a problem solver. And so he's wanting people that are going to be at the same level as him when it comes to being able to assign a strategic approach to a given problem. And when you can do that effectively, you're basically assembling a team of people that are going to think and not just do. We often get people that are informed by what they think is the check the box element of their job, instead of actually pushing back and saying, no, why are we doing it this way? He would rather have somebody that's going to say, let's try a different way. You know, within reason, obviously. You don't want somebody that's constantly just being a contrarian, but you do want people that are going to challenge the status quo, that are going to be solution oriented, that are going to think of a better way. So for him, that's much more important than saying, I got these letters after my name, therefore I got this graduate degree. And of course, there are certain roles where you're going to get some knowledge and some skills, whether it be as an engineer or a programmer or something like that. But again, he's looking more about what your examples of extraordinary performance. That's going to be far more weighted than just having a degree.
What is the 10X rule about, and how can it help you succeed?
Yeah, well, it's a magnifier, right? So I read Grant Cardone's book. I remember reading that book a few years ago, the 10X rule. And he was really big on it. And I sort of attracted to it because I thought it has a good application as a filter for entrepreneurs and business owners and anyone who wants to achieve anything, really. So for me, the 10X rule is a magnifying glass. So let me lay out, I guess, how I see it. And if that resonates with you, you should think about using it, because I think it's pretty powerful. If I was to take an example of, say, myself, right? All those years ago, back in the 1920s. Starting my first business. I'm going to start a business selling t-shirts to the market, right? I'm going to drop ship them. And my goal is to do $1 million worth of revenue in the first 12 months, right? Just as a number, roundabout sort of number. The 10X rule, as soon as you apply the filter to that principle of your business, the principle asks you one question, and it will say to you, why is it 1 million? Why is it not 10 million? So it's just a multiplier. So I pick a number, multiply it by 10, and what happens is, in terms of your decisions, how you see things, your lens on your business, the lens on your market, that has to change. And it has to change because the number is so much bigger than what you originally thought it should be. Because when someone picks a number for a business, like, how did you come up with that number? And most people do not research. Like when I started my business, I did no research. My very first business, I did absolutely no market research, right? Like, you know, who would have thought that you could go to a company like Deloitte and say, hey, we pay you a fee and then you give me a market report on the last 3 years of this market. And then you make educated decisions off the back of that report. Now that's great, no harm, no foul. That should always be the way you should do it. But, you know, if you're young and naive, like a lot of young entrepreneurs are these days, you know, you come up with a number and then what happens is you're handicapped at the start of your business because you really don't know that number that you selected is either true or false, achievable or not achievable. You have to be careful, but that said, the principle and the filter of the 10X rule, that if you applied it to the way that you think, your psychology, your business acumen, your business strategy, your business plan is, hey, I want to make $1 million selling t-shirts in the first 1 year. If I said to you, why is it not 10? And let's pretend that it is, everything that you do and the way that you think about your business has to change because you're going from 1 to 10. So how you apply yourself to marketing has to change, to sales has to change. The decisions have to be faster. You have to take more risks, you have to be more bold, and you have to break down more walls. Because the 10X principle allows you to do that. The concept of it is, in a roundabout sort of way, is commit first and figure it out later. Commit first and figure it out later. Now my own thing is, and I make this joke about engineers all the time, is what happens when you put 3 engineers in a room?
Nothing gets done.
Nothing. Because they're full of neurosis, right? They're very neurotic about getting things to 100%. Everything has to be perfect. The 10X rule will strip those principles away and then add a multiplier and a filter to that, so you see the business through a different lens. Now, it's the theory of achievement in an end-to-end context. If I said to you, I want to hit $100 million, and I was just laser focused on that, I might get to 75. But the guy, Tom, next to me who says, I want to hit $10 million, he's only going to get to 3. So the magnifying glass 10X's the principles of everything that you do, especially the way that you see your business. And it's not just about money, it's about the change in psychology. Like, man, how big do you have to think to go from 1 million to 10 million? Like, how big do you have to become inside yourself and the way that you think about decisions? Like, you have to be so much more powerful in your thought process. It's incredible, right? So big, successful people, like that's the difference I feel between a billionaire and a millionaire, is that billionaires take big risks and bet big and think big, and people who run a smaller company just don't. That's why I love that principle. So I think young entrepreneurs should apply it and read the book, The 10X Rule. I think it's a pretty good book. Podcasts, you know, 7 or 8 years ago to what they are now are completely different, including the popularity and including the amount of people doing them. What's your take on where this market's going?
Did you see the Scott Galloway on Diary of a CEO recently?
I did, yeah, I did.
Did you hear where he's talking about how podcasts, this is the year of the podcast as it relates to the election? I don't know if you remember that part.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, it was interesting, right? And I remember him talking about, you know, Kamala Harris and Trump, and you know, going on some of those podcasts like Joe Rogan's show would give you 10 to 15x more viewers than it would be going on Fox News, right? It's crazy. Like, that's such an incredible transition. So yeah, give me your feel on that. Like, what does that look like? Yeah. Do you think in America, especially moving forward?
Yeah, it's interesting, man. I think that we have, there's two sides to this equation. There's the Joe Rogans of the world, and the Scott Galloways and others, Stephen Bartlett, who have built platforms, Lewis Howes, that have built relatively big platforms that can act as huge mechanisms to get in touch with core audiences. And I think that's only getting more and more deeper. We are seeing a consolidation, meaning a lot of people that started a podcast in 2020, 2021, they've phased out. They did it. They realized that they're not going to be Joe Rogan. They're not going to be, a name brand. And they kind of gave up. But now we're seeing a new entrance of people who are getting in, and they're getting in, I would say, in a little bit more strategic place, more niche. So I see things happening in two big buckets. It's the big box, which is the Rogans of the world, and then you got more hyper niche. because you don't need to have a big audience to monetize. And you've heard, as have I, 1,000 true fans is where it's at. You know, you get 1,000 true fans, and if a good subsection of them can, if you have a really good mechanism to monetize those, if they're really 1,000 true fans and they're willing to pay 30, 40, 50 bucks a month, 100 bucks a month, because you're offering value that's of the same caliber, provide more in value than you take in payment. I think that's just a general rule, provide more in value than you take in payment. And so the micro niche category, so it's hyper specific, and that could afford you, I mean, if there's 5 areas to monetize a platform, which is advertising, sponsorship, affiliate, sell other people's product, sell your own product, and then build community. Advertising is for the big bucks and for Joe Rogan and Stephen Bartlett, but the cousin of advertising is sponsorship. Sponsorship, if you're speaking to a specific niche, so like I have a friend who started the vertical farming podcast. The vertical farming is like, who even knew that was a thing? But it's a subsection of agriculture that allows people who run businesses that feed into that $10 billion industry to connect with a specific audience. And in this case, it's people who care about vertical farming. And so now he's built a 6-figure income off of creating sponsorship, and you create sponsorship tiers, sponsorship tier 1, 2, and 3, that provides a media company worth of value to that potential sponsor. So your newsletter, your podcast, your YouTube channel, your speaking engagements, your call to actions, a mid-roll, a pre-roll, all the things that you could provide, and then it's sales, and then you sell to that sponsor. And then the other pieces is it brings brand recognition and credibility. I think podcasting, more than anything else, is a loyalty platform. Can it help with distribution? Sure, but you actually need to help get the podcast distributed for it to be. It's not a distribution platform inherently. YouTube is more of a distribution platform than a podcast. But a podcast and podcast and YouTube, the lines have kind of blurred. A podcast allows people to get to know you better. And if you look at the data, there's a lot more people who buy from a podcaster than any other medium out there.
What's the first step a business should take when planning to scale from $1 million to $10 million?
There's 2 categories of entrepreneurs, right? It's getting to that first million. I think when you get to that first million, it's like, hey, I can do this. Your confidence increases. You've learned some skills along that path, because that's not an easy path, that first 1 million, especially if you've got no business experience and it's your first startup. You got to figure a whole bunch of stuff out, like a lot, right? So that's like doing I think from 0 to $1 million is like doing your 3-year business degree or MBA, right? That's where you learn the foundational principles of business and how it actually really works, not all the bullshit that everyone tells you see on TikTok, because none of that's real. The second thing is if you want to scale from 1 million to 10 million, why is it 10 million? And by the way, scaling from 1 million to 10 million is a very definitive number. And if you wanted to scale to 10 million and your goal was 10 million, you will not get that. 100% that'll not happen. Because the number's too low to achieve that number. Because I think when you get to 10, my take on it, 0 to 1 is pretty hard. But you do that when you're young and resilient, right? So you can really go pretty hard against that number, and you have to have quite an open mindset to learn a whole bunch of things and be the dumbest person in the room. When you get to 10, I think it just gets easier, because I think you have a little bit of security wrapped around the founder and the company and the senior people within it, right? Getting to 10. And that's what the experts say, and I truly believe that, right? I think that's probably what the number is. And then as you get bigger than that, you get a little bit more security, and you create diversification in terms of revenue. Because you have enough revenue then to diversify, and that's where the scaling comes from. So scaling to 1 to 10, I don't know is the right terminology. I think you grow to 10, you don't scale to 10. So growing and scaling for me are 2 different things. Growing a business is growing a business. You're increasing revenue year on year over a period of time to get to X. X gives you X amount of cash flow to divest or invest back into the business for scalability. So my thing is, if there's entrepreneurs listening who want to get from 1 to 10, my first question is, why is it 10? Second thing is, if you want to get to 10, you should make it 16 or 17, and then you may get to 10. Because as I said in that 10X principle app, is that if you're thinking about 10, you're probably going to get to 6.5. Because your decisions are at 10 million. You know, and no one ever hits 100% of their budget, especially if you're just in that first, you know, startup phase of a company, because you just don't know enough yet, your market share is too small. And there's still a lot of ground to cover. So if you want to get to 10, make it 16.5 and go hard for 10. Go hard for 16.5, sorry, and you may hit 10.
Like everybody's doing culture. So let's step back and go, what do we mean by culture?
Yeah, okay.
So there isn't an accepted definition. I want to talk about one of the ones that's thrown around that I don't think you should use first. Start with a negative, then a positive. One of the easiest ones that's thrown around is culture's the way we do things around here. Like, it's a really easy statement. It's come out of some leadership stuff I've seen. It's made its way into safety. And it's a convenient way of describing it. However, what it does is it links culture is the same as behavior. So culture is the way we do things around here. It's saying they're the same thing. And I think that's a limited idea of looking at it, because essentially it makes you focus just on behavior. But also, I think the behavior is influenced by culture, not the same as it. And I think that behavior influences culture. So you need a working model that separates the two. Otherwise, you just get the shits with people's behavior, and you just keep trying to change people's behavior versus going, wait a minute, what's driving that behavior?
What is the most important factor to become a founder?
There's a couple of things that stand out for me. Belief systems. I think I grew up with the wrong belief system. So, you know, I had to pivot from the influence from my parents and the environment in which I grew up in. Some people grow up in tough environments. People have poor parents and grow up in a poor environment. Well, that's okay. You know, that shouldn't really determine your outcome. For me, all I learned again was work ethic. I just knew how to work hard. So when I walked into an environment, forged me opportunities, because they looked at me and they go, who's that kid who turns up before everybody else and is always the last to leave? They educated me, they taught me things, gave me skill sets. They employed me, and I was very respectful to someone paying me to do anything, really. You know, I wasn't really a smart kid, but I had tenacity and grit, right? So, you know, I think work ethic, tenacity, grit. You know, I look at things like courage. I think that's pretty important. If you're super entitled, which a lot of people are, let's face it, you know, it becomes a little bit harder for you, I think, because when you get hit and things go wrong, you tend not to be able to deal with those very well. And if you grew up in a tough environment and you're just naturally tough, you know, it's just water off a duck's back. You just carry on, right? So there's those things. I think you need to be physically strong. I think you need to look after your health. Your mindset needs to be strong as well. You need to have a good idea and to surround yourself with talent. You can't sell a shitty product to a market that doesn't exist. You'll just go broke. And that's the dumbest thing you could ever do. Trust me, I've done it. So, but you know, again, it's resilience, right? I think we underestimate strength, right? Not many people talk about it. Professor Galloway talks about it a lot. I sort of tune into him about masculinity and strength. Shit hits the fan, that you can kill everyone in the room or get everyone to safety. And I completely agree with that. I think true masculinity is starting to fall away a little bit. Women want a strong man who can provide for them, who is successful, and who can protect them, right? They just do. Like the research tells us this. If there was anything I could say to young entrepreneurs now is figure out and unpack what makes you strong and resilient.
How is the 10X approach different from regular goal setting?
It's the same question, right? It's like what I said before. When you set your goal at 1x to 10x, everything changes. The hours that you work will increase. The strategy that you write will be more detailed. The business plan that you write will be more thorough. The financial forecast that you put together will be more thoughtful and more researched. Everything changes because it has to. Because again, just think about it. 1 million to 10 million, completely different mindset. That's the whole principle of it, essentially. In its core fashion, that's exactly what it does.
Can you share an example of somebody who succeeded using the 10X rule?
Well, I have, right? Well, I could talk about that. I've had so many businesses over the years, most of them of which have failed, by the way. You know, let's say I think I've attempted over 20 businesses in my lifetime, right? and most of them have failed. As a young entrepreneur, you start all these little side hustles, right? When you're working your 9 to 5, and people who are watching this, most of them are doing that, right? Because you're not 100% sure. Like, you don't go all in, right? You know, unless you've saved up, you know, $100,000 to go all in, so you can still maintain your quality of life. You can do that, but most entrepreneurs will start with, hey, start with a friend, work 9 to 5, and then in the evenings, you're hustling, your side hustle. On the weekends, you're hustling. Early in the mornings, you're hustling, and that's where you build your business out, right? And you can continue to do that, and people probably should do that, but it'll get to the point where that won't work anymore, right? Where you have to make a decision to go all in. So I had multiple businesses, you know, when I was in my 20s, where I never really started anything because I just didn't have the psychology or the foresight to understand principles like the 10X rule and some of the great business principles that I've learned over the years. And if I could have applied that when I'm in my 20s, oh man, I would have got there so much faster. And the 10X principle, if I knew that then, I probably would have gone all in, because what that principle teaches you is that you sort of have to, right? Like, I get that there are side hustles, and I think people should do that. It is a bit of a safety risk mitigation process. As part of that magnifier, that 10X magnifier, if you had $5,000 in the bank and you quit your job and your rent was $500 a week, right? You've now got a window. You've got to run so fast to the goal to be able to pay your bills and pay your rent, to put food on the table. You don't have a choice. That means you have to move forward, you can't go backwards, because the road to go backwards no longer exists. So the principle teaches you the commitment. Now, if I had known that in my 20s, yeah, I would have got to my first million, or first few million a lot sooner than what I did. And I think it probably would have saved me about 10 years. So imagine if I could have got to 5 or 10 million in my 20s instead of waiting until my 30s. It would be a lot more now if I had understood simple principles like that. And that's really a psychological principle, the 10X rule.
What do people get wrong about the 10X rule?
Well, the thing they get wrong about it is they don't apply it. That's what they get wrong about it. Look, I think people don't understand it. Like they think 10X is just about, they really think it's a sales principle as well, right? Oh, make more calls and book more appointments and do all that sort of stuff. The 10X rule does apply to quantitatively just doing more, right? As an action and activity. By the way, startup's not based on years, it's based on revenue, right? But if you were to say 3 years in startup, normally when you start to get out of that startup phase into an emerging business phase, it's not just run, do more. What it is, it's about psychology. Like the 10X rule is about psychology. It's not about do 10 times more hours, right? Yeah, I think there's some really great and powerful things about that. I think you should do that when you're young, but you can't do it forever because you kill yourself, right? And health to build a successful company is really, really critical. We've learned that over the years. We didn't know that. I think business owners, really old business owners, Carnegies, Rockefellers, those sorts of guys, right? They didn't understand the principle of healthy mind, healthy body. And I think that's really critical now for young entrepreneurs. But the 10X principle really is about thinking. It's about psychology. It's about how you think about things, how you see things, how you decipher things, how you plan things, and how you analyze things, right? Like if you're losing money and you look at it every day, that should be a good push for you to get your shit together and to really, really sort of figure out, oh God, how do I turn this around? And here's the thing, if you're losing money and you don't know about it, you'll have to close the doors eventually. But if you've got good people around you, they'll hold you accountable to your numbers, and then you can get to fixing it sooner rather than later. Money is not evil. People are evil. Money in the right hands can do great things, and the wrong hands can do really bad things, right? Like we've witnessed that historically. I think people look at successful people and go, hey, I didn't have the courage to do that, so I'm just gonna put you down. Because that's the easiest way for me to accept myself. Right? And I think that's a real thing. I know in some countries and here they call it tall poppy syndrome, right? Where when someone's being really successful, they say things like this. They say, oh, they just do it for the money. And there's nothing wrong with that. Oh, look, they're probably dishonest. Like I've had people hate me online saying that, I'm taking money on good quality, hardworking people. I'm not doing that. I've never done that. They use that as an excuse for them not to be successful. you know, if you're completely impartial and independent, that really shouldn't matter. How do people see it and why do people not like it? I think, you know, they just need to look in the mirror, because I think that's truly what it is. You know, you have to be super candid with yourself and honest with yourself in terms of that, but I don't think most people are. That's cool, no harm, no foul. Just, you can say whatever you want to yourself. But you asked me the question, right?
How important is having the right team, and how do you find the right people for growth?
And wait for them to build the robots and then go and lease the robots. You wouldn't buy the robots, you'd lease them because you can depreciate them. That was a joke. I watched an hour worth of robotics manufacturing last night to sort of understand what the future looks like in terms of labor, right? And how will they deploy and what industries that will deploy. One thing I learned is that trades and services, like robots are not going to be doing that job soon. No one has mapped how to run a plumbing pipe from a tap to a drain yet. No one has mapped on how to construct a house using robots or robotics. Parts of it, yeah, 3D printing, yeah, I get that, but you still have to run the plumbing and the electrical work. They haven't mapped that yet. So there's still all these jobs in the market that won't change for many years, you know, the next 10 or 15, 20 years. Oh God, that was a big pivot, Lawrence. I'm now talking about robotics when you asked me a question about staff and finding the right team. Anyway, I think that's part and parcel of it, right? I think robotics, I think technology, exponential technologies will be part of culture and part of building a team. So I'm going to pivot and lean into that a little bit, because I don't think people are thinking about it. I think, are people fearful they'll lose their jobs? Oh, probably. I think some people are. In some industries, yes, and some industries, no. When it comes to office workers, they are probably not. You know, someone needs to caretake the technology until the technology is at a point where it can be self-sustainable and work independently. Can't do that yet. You know, ChatGPT still has hallucinations. You know, Gemini still has hallucinations. So, you know, and that's just large language models. Jesus, imagine when you get a couple of robots walking around the office killing people. Can you cut that out? Like, you know, consider technology as part of your cultural deck moving forward. Just even if it's a small percentage of that, talk about it, plant some seeds with the humans and try and figure out what that looks like. So is it important? Absolutely. Is the right term important? Absolutely. We all know that. If you don't think that, well, you got rocks in your head or cookies or some other type of material, because you need good quality people and the right team.
I think the question is about building a team. What do you think about international hires and how companies, maybe in Australia, should pivot towards hiring foreign talent from the States, Canada, like other countries?
If I had a company in Australia, you test the market to see what type of talent acquisition there is in the market, right? Like, can you acquire the talent that you need? My rule of thumb is if it's, I'm not too sure, it's a no. Like, so if you're getting candidates coming through and your gut's saying you, I'm not too sure, it's a no, then you might need to pivot, right? But you have to do a catchment over a certain amount of time. The ads have got to be good. You know, especially for a young startup, you got to write good quality ads to get good quality people, right? It's like, and if you're constantly, like I've noticed the market in 2024 changed dramatically and it became positive after such a candidate poor market during and after COVID-19, right? It just was. You couldn't find any good quality candidates. What happened 3.5 to 4 years after that is the quality got better. People were staying longer term. They weren't pivoting around and jumping around so much. So markets have changed a lot, and I think employment markets go up and down all the time, and they're heavily influenced by what's happening in the national part, right, of that market. Maybe not the global. I know that one was global. Maybe it's just the national market. So if that was the case, I'd pivot. I'd try another state, try another city in the country in which you reside, and then you would sort of build out from there. But you've got to start at your home base first and then work out. Everyone thinks just go to Silicon Valley. Look, you know, sure, do that. But now you have to find people who would move their families and move, say if you're in Australia, like we are, who'd relocate their families. There's a cost to that, sure, so you have to be sure you make the right decision. So you have to recruit on a couple of things, right? Technical abilities, experience, culture.